In the words of Fritz Haber's godson, we must remember Haber in all his complexity, for he was a man of scientific greatness, deeply cultivated, but in an excess of patriotism, he invented gas warfare, which has come to define the unspeakable horror of the First World War. In the late 1800s, the world was running out of food. Within a century, the world's population had increased from 0.9 billion to 1.65 billion, and this population boom left farmers struggling to meet the demand for crops. Scientists warned that many would starve unless crop yields were increased through the use of nitrogen fertilizers. British chemist Sir William Crookes asserted, "It is the chemist who must come to the rescue. It is through the laboratory that starvation may ultimately be turned to plenty." As concern grew across the globe, German scientist Fritz Haber developed a scientific solution that would change the world: the Haber process. This process allows for an easier way to create ammonia, a key ingredient in plant fertilizers. The Haber process was and still is the greatest scientific and social triumph of the 20th century, ensuring that people had enough food to eat. Tragically, this same process would lead to the creation of poisonous gases used in chemical warfare, first employed during World War I. Born in Breslau, Germany, on December 9, 1868, to a Jewish family, Fritz Haber grew up with an interest in chemistry. During his primary school education, Haber conducted many chemical experiments, and from 1886 to 1891, Haber studied chemistry at 3 universities in Germany. As a young man, he was bursting with ambition. "We only want one limit, the limit of our own ability," he once wrote. After university, he worked at his father's chemical business and at the Institute of Chemical Technology in Berlin, where he was a professor of physical and electrochemistry. Soon after, Haber began working on his own experiments in the field of combustion chemistry. At the turn of the 20th century, industrialized nations such as England were struggling to feed their growing populations and needed to import wheat. Fritz Haber triumphantly found a way to overcome this limitation and grow enough food. By 1908, Haber was the first person able to show that the combination of high pressure and a catalyst made ammonia. It was a triumph for the scientific community because it provided a way to make enough ammonia to be used in plant fertilizers. The world started to grow enough food, and in 1918, Haber won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for the Haber process. Plants benefited heavily from the creation of fertilizer because they need nitrogen to survive. The more nitrogen plants intake, the healthier they are. Ammonia, a water-soluble compound containing nitrogen, occurs naturally, but not in a high enough concentration to grow as many plants as the world needed.
So there were nitrogen fertilizers. They were either from the guano from bat caves in South America, or there was some mined sodium nitrate. For nitrogen sources, they really didn't have any that weren't deposited because of animal activity largely.
To increase the amount of ammonia made, the Haber process was passed on to chemist Carl Bosch for industrial development, whose machine could produce 198 pounds of ammonia per hour. These advances in ammonia production have significantly increased yields of food and feed.
Well, in today's world, we actually would not be able to feed 50% of the population without the use of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers that we produce today.
In 70 years, there has been a 6-fold increase in the yields of United States cornfields. Nitrogen fertilizer has allowed farmers to achieve continuously high yields on the same land, eliminating the need for clearing new lands. In his book, Enriching the Earth, environmental scientist Vaclav Smil says that the Haber process has been of greater fundamental importance to the modern world than the airplane, nuclear energy, spaceflight, or television. The expansion of the world's population would not have been possible without the synthesis of ammonia. Brot aus Luft, as the Germans put it, or bread from air. Haber's great triumph also contained the seeds of an even more immediate tragedy. When World War I broke out in 1914, the German army requested possible tear gases and other irritants to use against the enemy. Desperate to prove himself to his country, Haber devoted all of his scientific knowledge and resources to provide Germany a secret weapon, poison gas. Haber's work held the key to the synthesis of nitrates and other explosives essential to chemical warfare. In 1916, Fritz Haber was acting as chief of Germany's Chemical Warfare Service. One of the deadly weapons that Haber created using his process was chlorine gas. This poison gas was first used during World War I at the Second Battle of Ypres. On April 22, 1915, the Germans launched an attack on Ypres in western Belgium that was being held by British, French, Canadian, and Algerian troops. After a period of heavy shelling, a blue-white mist drifted toward the Allied line. It was a cloud of chlorine gas, released from cylinders that were placed by the German army under the supervision of Haber. Major Andrew McNaughton of the Canadian Army remembered the Algerians streaming past him, their eyeballs showing white and coughing their lungs out. Most soldiers who inhaled the gas died painfully. Some fled in sheer terror, and many shot themselves to escape the pain. Over 87,000 Allied soldiers were killed or missing.
Well, here I am, slightly wounded on my right hip and side from shrapnel, a shell bursting almost on top of me, and it is miraculous how I got off so lucky. Also, I'm suffering a little from the effects of the gas which was thrown at us, and my condition would have been much worse had I not had my nose and mouth covered with my handkerchief. It really is like hell let loose.
Over the coming weeks, the Germans launched numerous attacks using gas and artillery, and by the end of World War I, over 1.3 million casualties were caused by chemical weapons, all made possible by Fritz Haber. During the course of Haber's career, he tried to prove his worth as a patriotic German, but was denied any recognition from his country because he was Jewish. One day, in 1933, he went to his institute to work, only to be told, "The Jew Haber is not allowed here." This only drove Haber to create not only poisonous gases, but also pesticide gases. From his research, the Zyklon B process was developed and used by Nazis to murder millions in concentration camps, including some of Haber's extended family. Albert Einstein, one of Haber's colleagues, concluded, "Haber's life was the tragedy of the German Jew, the tragedy of unrequited love." In more recent times, nations have tried to ban the production and use of chemical weapons. In 1980, the Chemical Weapons Convention was opened in the UN Conference on Disarmament. The treaty that eventually went into effect on April 29, 1997, bans chemical weapons and requires their destruction. Although this treaty passed, countries are still using chemical weapons. In Syria, there have been 85 reported chemical attacks since 2013, including the Ghouta chemical attack, which had an estimated death toll from 281 to 1,729 people. Syria is not the only country who has been defying the treaty. In 2004, U.S. Marines used the chemical weapon white phosphorus in Fallujah, Iraq during Operation Phantom Fury, and again in Iraq in 2017. To chemist Richard Vilstadter, we should misjudge this scientist seriously if we were to judge him only by his harvest. The stimulation of research and the advancement of younger scholars become ever more important to him than his own achievement. To Karl Bosch, the very substance intended to provide food and life to millions of our countrymen, and which we have produced and supplied for years, became a cruel enemy for reasons we are as yet unable to fathom. So what can we say about Haber's contradicting legacy? It is said that as many as 2 out of 5 humans on Earth owe their existence to this German chemist's scientific triumph, which allows the world to grow enough food. Tragically, this same process led to the creation of poisonous gases used in chemical warfare that continues to have a tragic impact on human life today.